I reached 1 million subscribers a while ago, and I said I'd do a Q&A, and I asked for questions, and to my utter shock, I got over 400 of them, and I couldn't do all of them. I'm very sorry if I missed it, but in recompense, to make up for my wrongs, I'm going to try and get through as many of them as I possibly can on my phone here. What is your least favorite trope in horror writing and why? I don't really read a huge amount of horror, and I don't watch a huge amount of horror. I'm not very good at it. But I tend to hate when you reveal what the monster is or the terrible thing is, and then it's no longer really scary anymore, it just purely relies on jump scares. That's probably it. Stephen King once said that horror isn't everything up until you open the door, or something like that, and I think that's when horror is at its best. How do you get across in writing that your main character is not human without dumping an anatomy lesson at the top of the first chapter? Check out, I think it's Player of Games by Ian M. Banks. There's a chapter in there where he basically just gives you the information that these people are called human, but they're not actually human. Here's what they actually are. I think if you try to make it sound more natural, you know, try to bring in the exposition in really sneaky ways, you know, they looked at themselves in the mirror and they saw their third tentacle, I think it can often come across as like I look at it and I go, yeah, oh, you're clearly trying to give me this information in more natural ways, but it's not working. If it's really, really hard, I tend to prefer like the writer just straight up saying, this person has this, this, and this, and this, like in a very honest way that's not trying to hide it, you know, rather than trying to come up with like really thin reasons for revealing certain information that are kind of flimsy and just obviously there. What media or storytelling mediums have you not explored or wish to explore more deeply? I really want to explore manga or anime more deeply. I think there's a lot of room to plunge. What's the deal with the bread thing? What is the lore behind that? I love bread. I made a Dutch oven loaf like yesterday. It's my weakness. I will eat as much bread as possible. I love all types of bread. What advice would you give to putting visuals into words without making it crummy? I don't know what you mean by crummy, but for me personally, like what I do in my novel is a character will pick up a toy and it won't describe really the toy that much. It will describe the memories associated with the toy. Things that are like indirect contexts for whatever you're describing. If you're describing a city, then, you know, the feeling of the bustling of people rather than just like the shape of the towers. As someone who is beginning in writing, how do you develop your writing skills? You watch my videos. No, but I mean, just find a book that you really love, read it, try and figure out how they describe something and then use those techniques in your own novel. Obviously put your own spin on it, but just genuinely, just like try and take from other books in what the styles that they're developing. Do you think that Aang's energy bending can give bending to non-benders in the way lion turtles gave bending to humans? No. When you were a kid, was it a culture shock to see seasons reversed in 99% of imported media? No, because that was the way it always was. We still have a culture of winter Christmases here. We have a culture of, you know, pumpkins during autumn, that sort of thing. What genre of literature do you enjoy the most? Science fiction. Have you always liked reading, and if so, what were your earliest favourite books? I read Secret 7 and Famous 5, but the first book that really got me reading was The Hobbit. And I read that when I was about 8, and ever since then I've just always read it. But Eragon, the Inheritance series, was really big for me. Favourite classic fantasy story? Lord of the Rings. Any strange encounters with fans? I did have one guy give me a book that he wrote, which turned out to have animated porn in it, which was a very interesting thing. I wish him my best. If you conquered the world, what would you do with your reign? I would overhaul the education system. Series you personally disliked? I didn't dislike it, but I didn't find The Expanse, and I've read the first 2 books, as strong as other people seem to find them. They were good, but just good for me. When writing gets difficult to carry on in terms of the length, how do you carry on? I have never written super long novels, so I'm afraid I just don't know there. 1 million? Isn't that just the population of New Zealand? No! We have 5 million. Favorite part about living in New Zealand? Where else would you live? Oh, easily the space. Just the feeling that you're never too far away from nature, and like it's never crowded. I couldn't stand living in like a intensely crowded place. Where else would you live? I'm about to live in Europe for 2 years, so I guess I want to live there. Favorite Pixar film? Inside Out, for obvious reasons. How do you get inspired to write a video or your books? On the main channel, I've got a bunch of topics which I'm always returning to. I've got writing, world building, Avatar, Lord of the Rings, kind of general video essay about kind of media, so I can sort of cycle through those. Generally, though, I've got to have something I sort of want to say. I don't really know how to explain it more than that. But you've also got to remember that I do get paid to do this. Like, this is my job. So sometimes I do videos where I'm not particularly inspired. But when it comes to my books, I 100% always start with something I care intensely about. And I want to explore that feeling, that philosophical question, that idea. A lot of people have, like, in their head, just like book ideas, constantly fighting for attention. They don't know which one to get down. I just don't have that. I don't have that. I very rarely get book ideas, and when I do it, I tend to write them. And that's because I guess I have a high bar for like what I want to write. It's got to be really sticking with me in a deep way where I'm like, I have to get this down, you know? A world-building idea or like a character idea isn't enough for me. When did you write your first story, and what made you write it? Okay, so very first story was when I was like 8. It was like a Star Wars Lord of the Rings ripoff, alright? That was when I was real young. If you're meaning like actual story, it would have been when I was 12, and there was a book, and it was also kind of a ripoff, to be honest. It was Avatar and dragons and stuff. But if we're going real first story, it would have been like around I was like 17, 18, 19, and that was because I really wanted to write about suffering and the problem of suffering, and that's where that story grew out of. Do people talk about your accent? You don't sound very Kiwi. Okay, so when people say like Kiwi accent, they usually just mean Aucklander, which is get in the car, Kevin, or get in the car, you know, or shoe bro, yeah. I am not from that part of the country, and believe it or not, New Zealand does have different accents. But I also do enunciate. I do speak differently on camera than I probably do in real life, and part of that is because it wouldn't be as clear. I tend to pronounce my vowels a lot more on camera because the rest of the world does, but New Zealand tends to dull their vowels a lot. What does ultimate success as a writer look like to you? Oh, simple. I am the world's #1 writer, known for being extremely profound, insightful, and incredibly successful, with millions of copies sold and awards left, right, and centre, going down as one of the literature greats of the 21st century. That's all I ask. Best book you've read recently? Solaris by Stanislaw Lem was fantastic from beginning to end. Was there anyone who helped you improve your writing or word-building skills? I mean, I had people who more distinctly helped me improve my essay writing than my fiction writing. The fiction writing was a lot more just practice over and over and over. I have an arts degree, but to be perfectly honest, my university arts degree was just awful and I hated it, and I will talk about it at some point. But my high school teacher, Mrs. Stewart, would have been the one that helped with my essay writing the most, and I think the books Annihilation, Stories of Your Life, probably impacted my style of writing a lot. You're going to post on TikTok? I am, now-ish. I'm trying to do more there. That's my TikTok. Blah. When you have just a few fake scenes, a main character, and a general vibe of what your world will be, how do you cement them into an actually coherent plot? Alright, find out what would be a really interesting obstacle, tension, problem for that main character to face, if you understand your main character. Or 2, what would be a really interesting complication to introduce to your world that would change it, challenge it, that would force people to make decisions, that would impact the main character's place in that kind of world. Or, theoretically, you've got these scenes which are really important. How are you going to build up to those? How are you going to complicate those scenes to make them land? Think about the actual foundations for the emotional core points of those scenes and go like, alright, so to actually make this land, what do I need in the first place? To make this character's death land, how do I endear them? Alright, cool. What do I put them through first? And then you got a bit more of a story. I was hooked during Season 8 of Game of Thrones when you did a rewrite of The Long Night and loved the rest of the episodes. Also loved your rewrite of the Legend of Korra series. Thank you. Are there any other pieces of media you would consider doing rewrites for? I mean, to be perfectly honest, I kind of hate my rewrite of The Long Night. I quite like the end of the series ones, but the Long Night one I'm not a huge fan of. No, there's nothing I'm really kind of egging to do a rewrite of. I've thought about doing like how would I do a Last Airbender film, but it's just kind of like summarizing the plot. What real life places, ideas, people, time periods, or things do you find yourself drawing on the most for your own writing? Robots, artificial intelligence, the world is ending. My novel is actually sci-fi, and it's technically based in our world in the near future, so it hasn't got like a secondary world, but it is based in Asia, so yeah. What are some themes or other things that you feel are not really covered much in fantasy that you would love to see? I would like to see more Eastern European fantasy, and more kind of Arabian-styled fantasy. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. We've got a lot of Asian-centric fantasy now, which is really, really cool to see. But I'd also like to see a lot more literary fantasy, I think. When are you going to cover Cloud Atlas? It's been a thing I have wanted to talk about, but I've just never really had the space to, but I will one day, I'm sure. Was there a particular moment or experience in your life that made you realize that writing, analysis, and such was what you wanted in the future? Yes! Oh my gosh, the first time I put out that hard and soft magic video, and it got such a response, like 1 million views, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. I've been talking about Avatar and How to Train Your Dragon and Lord of the Rings, and they were great, I still love them, I obviously do, but when my writing videos and world building videos started taking off, it felt like I was making a difference. It felt like I was doing something worthwhile, you know, that people genuinely, truly valued, and wasn't just, you know, because they liked Avatar. Education is so important to me. It's a passion that I've got. So I guess that is where that really came in. I was like, yeah, no, this gives me fulfillment on a really deep and personal level, not just fun. Do you have a process you use to organize your characters, world building, sort of pre-writing notes before writing the story? If you do, I'd love to see what the process is like. I basically start out with kind of like a theme, an idea, and then I go, okay, so if I want to talk about grief, right, and the trauma and grief and how it can destroy us in our relationships and the horrific realities that sometimes grow out of it, I go, okay, so what characters can I create to really make that story happen, to target that idea? And then I do, and then I've got a plot. So I've got a plot, I've got characters and I've got a tension that is set between them, and then I sort of build out a plot from that. But in terms of like actual notes that I've got down, I tend to write out probably a 2 to 3 page summary, and then I divide it up into chapters, and that's basically it. And I start writing. As long as I know where I'm going at the end, I'm always keeping that in mind. I'm writing this and I'm going, okay, this is all building up to this point at the end that I want to make. You know, the scene I want to happen, this character I want to do this thing. It's all about building up and making it feel connected and coherent. How many anime have you watched? I am the anime equivalent of going to a Thai restaurant and ordering the chicken pad Thai, because I have watched all of the big ones. You know, I've watched Attack on Titan, and I've watched Death Note, and I've watched Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, and I've watched a couple of more niche ones. But that's the majority of it. I'm really sorry. I want to watch Monster and Steins Gate at some point. I'm curious, which world do you think you could have the most fun in if you could live in it? Probably the culture, because, you know, as much as I'd love to go and live in, like, the Avatar world, you know, I'd be a peasant. I'd be a peasant who's poor and probably can't even bend and just die of, like, starvation or disease at some point, you know? Or I'd die in some war in some other fantasy thing. The culture, I am part of a universe-spanning empire of perfection. What kind of viewer are you? And if that influences the way you write, if you notice the correlation between the two things. I'm a very symbolic writer. There's a lot of symbols and motifs and themes in my novel that are very intentional, and I tend to notice those and be really invested in stories that explore them in really interesting ways, you know, a lot more. So, you know, if I'm watching Breaking Bad and I'll be like, oh, the fly represents Walt's guilt, and everyone's just like, okay, sure, why does that matter? I'm like, that's interesting, that's understanding the story, that's what I'm here for. My question is, are you ever planning on writing a fantasy epic? It's just not on the cards at the moment. The next book that I want to write would probably be a cyberpunk one, a neo-noir mystery type thing. I really love those. We'll see. Any tips to push through a creative block? Sometimes you do just get mind blocked, sometimes you can be depressed, but a lot of the time when I'm really struggling with a scene and I'm like, the scene is not working, it's because I've already made the mistake a few pages back. My characters have done something that I kind of regret, that I'm unsure about, and it's brought me to this scene where it doesn't feel right because of the problems I've already created for myself. So I would go back and I'd be like, alright, so how did we get here? Is this the direction I actually want to go? If I try to rewrite it, what other route could I take? When did you first realize being a writer was what you wanted to be, and it was actually something you could be? I was always writing stories for as young as I can remember, basically, and my parents have always been very supportive of my creative endeavors. They did say, hey, you've got to go get another degree as well in case it doesn't work out. So I did, I got a law degree, but I have always been writing, and I never thought it wasn't a possibility. I was always someone who thought, you know, I will be the exception. I will be the writer who actually makes it out, you know. That tends to be how I thought about it growing up. There was never an option of like, oh, this isn't going to work. It's like, I will make it work. It will happen. That sounds like real pseudo, like, motivational crap. No, it was just me being obnoxious. How often do you spend your time researching, finding other pictures and footage it takes for normal episode? That's actually quite a substantial part of the video process. Now, I have editors now. They do all that for me because I didn't enjoy doing it. But I remember how long it took. Yeah, it took a long time. I don't know how long exactly, though. What stories are you currently reading, listening to, watching that you think you'd either like to review or have inspired a possible video? Currently watching The Last of Us. I just finished reading Solaris. I am playing Kena Bridge of Spirits, but I don't know if I'll ever talk about that. I am listening to The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, which may come up at some point. I don't know. I've just finished reading Vita Nostra, which is this pseudo-Lovecraftian, Ukrainian, dark academia, Hogwarts thing. I would like to talk about that in the distant future in a long video on cosmic horror. Are there any topics that you want to make deep dives into like you did with the cyberpunk video? Yes, cosmic horror, or Lovecraftian horror, it'll happen one day. How did you learn about the technical terms of writing and world building, and what inspired you to start the channel? I was inspired because I just wanted to give it a shot. That was what I did. I gave everything a shot. I tried so many businesses, and I've always been a creative person. It was a creative thing to do. I said, why not? And I started making vlogs. They were terrible. Nobody watched them until someone did, and now I'm here. Woohoo. But then, I learned the technical terms by reading. I just researched. I was interested. You learn the grammar. You learn the technical terms. You come up with them. But I didn't invent, like software building and hardware building. Do you ever feel burned out as a creative with writing and YouTube, and how do you recover from it? Yeah, it does happen. When it tends to happen, I will often fall back on like a lore video, like an Avatar video, a Lord of the Rings video, which I can just sort of put together. I don't have to do that much creatively. I just get to sort of take the stuff that's already out there and sort of reinterpret it, because those tend to be a lot easier than like writing, super creative stuff. It does happen from time to time. Laura, famously, I will get incredibly sick, like physically ill, about once a year or so, and have to take a bit of time off. Time is really the only thing that you can do with that. Time to heal and to recuperate. How to introduce the reader to a fantasy world and teach them about the lore and things not important to the plot but help with the world building. Make them interesting, Make them so that the character cares about them in interesting ways. You can have lots of things that are related to world building that are also deeply related to character. If a character really, really loves hot air balloon racing, and that's a core part of the sports of this culture, that's an interesting way to explore character in the world. You can you can bring it into an obstacle. If the characters have to do a heist, then you can talk a bit about the way the economy works. Pretty easily if they're targeting like a rich banker dude, How can I equate your 4 writing series for comic book creation? I don't know much about comic book creation, and I'm sure it's different in some ways, but I think I try my best to talk about kind of like universal storytelling ideas where it's pretty applicable no matter the medium, so I would hope it's, applicable. How do you decide whether to write in first person or third person? So third person varies a lot. You've got third person limited, which is like really close. It's basically first person with he, she, they. If a character leaves their view, then we don't follow them. Harry Potter basically is written like this. But then, of course, you've got third person omniscient, where you're quite detached from the characters, where you can go from at any time between any of them. And they're very, very different styles of writing. So like George R. R. Martin, he writes in third person limited, but he switches between each of the characters with the different chapters, and you could theoretically write any of them in first person. It wouldn't really change all that much, but the reason he went with third person is, of course, with so many characters to manage, third person allows you to name them and kind of organize them a little bit better. That's not true. It's written in third person limited and first person. One of the perspective characters is first person and the main character is third person limited, and you'll see why it's really important for the story. But yeah, I suppose figure out how psychologically close in terms of the actual writing and limited the perspective of the writing you want it to be. What are you good at? What do you enjoy writing? Those are equally important questions. What is your favorite thing about your commentary on your video subject matter? I take every story that I talk about like very seriously. Or I try to. I like to link it to kind of real world ideas, philosophy and history, and geography and politics and stuff. Not just like a review, but kind of with the deeper ideas that we got to get to. I really like doing that. What is something that you think you need to work on when creating videos? Oh man, I need to get so much better with camera work. I need to get so much better with you know, the editing style and the professional kind of angle. There's a whole other industry to YouTube now that I am just not very good at. I need to get better at TikTok. I need to get better at shorts. I need to get better at consistency. There's so much stuff that I need to get better at. Do you have a favorite poet and or philosopher? And if so, why do you like them the most? I haven't read a huge amount of poetry. I'm actually trying to get into it now. I've got a book called Where Hope Comes From just over there, which I'm reading. So I don't know who my favorite poet would be, like T.S. Eliot. That just sounds like a boring answer. Wrong. No, I do have a favorite poet. It's Savannah Brown. She's actually a YouTuber. You can look up her channel. She's got these beautifully poetic videos. She's also got a website. Go check that out. She does books. I've got a few of them over on the shelf there. She's just a very human, newer writer, and I tend to appreciate those. Yeah. I think my favorite philosopher might be like John Rawls, who came up with this idea called the veil of ignorance, which is kind of like, if you did not know where you were going to end up in society, right, and you're trying to organize society and the laws it's meant to live by, and you don't know where you're going to end up in society, at the bottom, in the middle, and the top, what kind of person you're going to be, but you have to organize society before you find that out. How would you organize it? And I really like, I think I just like that idea as kind of a political philosophy, you know, potentially. Favorite character in the Silmarillion? Probably Fëanor or Fingolfin. I love the moment where Fingolfin wounds Morgoth 7 times. How did you go about editing your novel? I feel like that's a section of writing advice I don't often see. Yeah, so, okay, I wrote my book for the first time, and then I rewrote it again, and I wrote it completely from scratch. I rewrote out every single sentence. I didn't copy over anything, and I think that's really important, because when you're actually having to write out every single word, every single sentence, you are psychologically engaging with it in a different way. If you just copy things over, you sort of take a bit for granted, you assume a lot, and that is, what you want to do is really critically engage with what you've already written. I also left a decent amount of time, at least a few months, between those drafts, and I think that's really important because time allows you to sort of mature a little bit, right? You know, think about how much you might think about differently about a page you wrote yesterday. You need that space to be able to engage with your draft differently. I did that again, but on the third draft, I did keep over some things from the second draft, the parts that I thought were really good. But I did rewrite out a lot of it. And then fourth, it wasn't really a fourth draft at that point. At that point, it was kind of more editing. Rewriting sections of it. So again, that's a difference. You're not rewriting the book, you're rewriting sections of it at that point. And then at that point, I got to the time where I was like, okay, I need to have someone read this. And someone had, for the record, someone did read it in like the second draft period, and they gave me feedback, and I incorporated that. But I then got in contact with all my friends and family, and I said, hey, read this, give me feedback. I printed it off for them in giant books, and then they got to read it, and then they gave me feedback, and I took all of them, and I was like, all right, everyone agrees that this is a problem. Let's change that. Let's change this. And I did another draft. But at that time, I was keeping a lot of it because I was pretty confident with it and the stuff that they praised and stuff like that. But then there was a whole element of the story that I did change. So there's 3 perspective characters. And one of them takes up about 70% of the novel, one of them takes about 20% of the novel, and one of them takes about 10% of the novel. And I rewrote that 10% from scratch because of the reception. And then you keep editing until you get to a point where I was like changing wording. I was changing little sentences on a day-to-day basis, and it wasn't necessarily because it was better, it was just because I was feeling slightly different that day, and at that point, I felt like I was ready to go forward to publishers. Do you see yourself continuing YouTube in the future? Yes, absolutely. I love this job. It's amazing. I get to do so many creative things. But, you know, in this economy, it's also great to have a platform for publishing, you know, fiction, and I want to be a writer. That's always been my main passion, being able to share this with an audience. That is cool. I want to put together a short story collection at some point in the future. I've got my novel coming out, and I'm going to write another novel. It's all happening, I promise. What's your opinions on bringing one's religion or faith into one's books? Go for it, man. Do it. I don't know. Do it as much as you want. To bring as much as yourself into your story as you like. 100%. What made you want to pursue YouTube and writing as opposed to being a lawyer? And do you regret to going to law school? I do not regret going to law school. It was such a formative period for me, and I don't think I would have been able to be a YouTuber if I didn't go to law school in the first place, because it gave me the time to do so. But I love... I've always loved writing, and YouTube is a creative place. Of course I'll do it. I would be a lawyer because it's like a thinky job and it would have made money, but it wouldn't have been nearly as fulfilling as this. What do you think are the biggest differences between books, graphic novels, animation, and live-action film? Books are definitely the most flexible of all of those, and maybe I'm biased, but you can do so much more in a novel than you can do in a film. Obviously, you can do different things in a film, but you can engage with like characters and their thinking processes in books that I've just never really been able to see captured on film all that well. Obviously, you could make a good argument that film does like action film. Action scenes better because, like, look, I love a good written action scene, but they're hard to do well. Visuals can make it just so exciting, right? Obviously, film has a whole other layer to it in, like, the way things are shot. It's got a whole other way to derive meaning that books don't have. And that is where that strength comes in, camera angles and all those other kind of like meta laws about how stories work on film. Graphic novels, I don't really know. Are they some sort of middle ground between the two of them, maybe? Animation has the capacity to express certain things visually that films just don't manage to do it. There's a reason that like video game adaptation for films have failed so many times, and that's part of it. Or like anime adaptations into live action, they all look terrible. It's like it's got such a different character. It can capture different types of stories. When writing deep first-person point of view, how do you pull off the kind of suspense Hitchcock talks about with the audience having knowledge that the characters don't? This is called dramatic irony. So when you've got kind of first person that is limited to only what the character knows and what they feel, we don't get anything outside of their perspective. There are only really two things to this. Number one, you write from a different perspective. So sometimes people will do this with prologues or with like an intermittent little mini chapter type thing. I've seen it done. But then alternatively, that is just kind of one of the sacrifices that you make with first person deep POV. You can derive different types of tension from them not knowing things that we might have otherwise had shared. It's just one of the downsides, I guess, of that. Do you think working as a creative on your own is good for the mental health, or should such a job come with a warning label, like teachers should? I don't know who would give that label, but it does very much depend on the person. I am a very independent person. I don't mind being on my own. I am introverted. I like working on my own. I don't like having to rely on other people a huge amount. So for me, it's good. It's closer to like peace of mind. I like being the only person that I have to rely on, I guess, in that sense. I mean, I have an editor. They have a huge amount of work, but they live in a different country, and we aren't able to talk, every day. I do, for the most part, work on my own. But it can also be very isolating, and I think if I was to actually put a warning about anything, it would be the constant negative critique, from everywhere. I am fortunate to have a very positive audience, but it does get to me how it gets to you psychologically, how negative, how even just like lots of little negative things can get to you. They pile up. Even if it's only like 5% of the engagement that you get, there's this constant presence that 5% of people really hate what you do, or really don't like you, or that they think you're bad at things, and you start to internalize that idea that like, well, there's a lot of people out there who think I'm really awful at my job, and it's not fun. It's not fun. I think that is the element that you sort of know happens. You sort of know it's out there, that it is a part of it, but you don't think about it. You don't think about it in the way that it actually is. That is the part that I've had to grapple with the most. I'm a relatively psychologically robust person, but yeah, that's done a number on me in a way. Could you do some analysis of JRPGs sometime? Yes, I am going to do Nier Automata at some point, 100%. On getting yourself to actually sit down and write, do you have any advice for someone who is struggling? Any rituals or tips to advance beyond procrastinating? Get rid of your phone, turn off the internet, go to somewhere that is away from home, go to a library. Honestly, I don't find cafes work that well for me. It's too much noise that just gets in my head. Libraries are fantastic. You're surrounded by books, you're surrounded by people studying, and if you are surrounded by people studying, you are also willing to study. And write, set yourself a low limit. Just be like, alright, I'm sitting here, I can go home when I've done 1,500 words. okay? But I can't do that. It doesn't matter what they are, you just got to get those down. Personally, if that's what you're really struggling with, personally, I set myself a low limit, but they've got to be good words, you know? And that's over like an 8-hour period. Like 2,000 words in 8 hours is not that much per hour, but they've got to be good words. That's what I tend to tell myself. If you could switch places with any protagonist and live out their life story, who would you pick? That is hard, because so many protagonists have terrible lives. Like, I mean, half of them, like, their parents are murdered, and then, like, their mentors get murdered, and then, you know, the other 50% of the time, they end up dying. So, I don't know, who's a protagonist that has just, like, a really simple, nice life? I genuinely don't know. Maybe, like, Goldilocks? Have you read the Avatar comics? I was considering getting them. Yeah, I've read all of them, and to be perfectly honest, they're pretty hit or miss. I don't like The Search. I think the only, like, really solid one is The Promise. I'm not a huge fan of Smoke and Shadow, or how they've kind of handled Azula a huge amount. Yeah, it's I mean, they're not terrible, they're just quite lukewarm, for me, personally. Do you think Lord of the Rings deserves a spot amongst the greatest literature of all time? I mean, I think it already has that. Like, if you talk about, like, literature classics, it comes up in those lists. How did you choose your channel name? So, originally, if you go back and watch my very first videos, it was meant to be a kind of a document of my years through university, so that I could look back and kind of see what I had done. And then it very, very quickly completely changed from that, as it does with every single YouTube channel. What makes you feel like life is worth living? Connection, I guess, probably the best thing. Connection, doing good, and being part of something greater than myself. If I am living purely for myself, then there is a simplicity and redundancy to that I tend to find. If I'm living for something that is more important than myself, that goes beyond me, I guess there's a greater purpose to it that you can attach yourself to, that you have to live for out of a sense of obligation. I don't know if that makes sense. What's a video you'd love to make if you didn't have to worry about audiences, algorithms, or demonetization? This is going to sound really, really egotistical, but I would love to make a detailed kind of video about why I've written the way that I have, to look at my book and, you know, the first chapter and be like, well, I used the symbol of a bridge because she is between two places at once, just like the village is the past and the city is the future. She is trapped between the past and the future, always being dragged forward, but stuck in this crux. You know, I'd love to do that sort of thing, but I mean, people haven't read the book, people don't know the book, people don't know me. Yeah. What was the exact moment you knew you loved Avatar? Oh, basically the first time I saw bending. When I saw bending, it was just like magic that looks cool. I love it, this is awesome. Yes, please, more. How did you come to enjoy writing and the analysis critique of storytelling? I don't know if I came to enjoy it through any, you know, purposeful thing. It was just something I've always enjoyed, as far as I can remember. You studied law at some point. Has that perspective affected your writing or YouTube career? It's made me better at essay writing and more interested in essay writing, but I don't know if it's impacted it that much. Oh, it's been helpful with copyright claims. Holy crap, yeah, no. Knowing copyright law? Yes. What do you love about writing? For me, writing stories is one of the only ways that we can truly get inside the minds of another person, and that we can let other people get inside our minds. And that deep sense of connection is really valuable for me. Which book should every writer read? Whichever book they want to read. Where do you see your channel going in the future? The next year, 5 years, 10 years? Oh, jeez, I have no idea. Probably diversifying my content a bit more, maybe doing some more documentary-style stuff, more creative storytelling things, you know, like the end credits to humanity, maybe. Can you do a backflip? Only on a trampoline. What are your thoughts on torture as a method of interrogation? Studies have shown that torture is incredibly unreliable as a way to gather information, so I'm against it. Which does imply I'd be in for it if it was a reliable source of information. No torture, just like no death penalty either. How did the channel all take off? Alright, so basically I had my vlog era where I made little random skits and vlogs and nobody watched them. I got like 60 views. And then I had my How to Train Your Dragon era because I made a How to Train Your Dragon video and that took off, and so I made How to Train Your Dragon videos, and then I brought in Avatar videos, and then I brought in Lord of the Rings videos, and that was sort of that period. And then I started doing writing videos, or I think world building might have been first, I don't really remember. And then I started doing writing and word building, and that's a whole new era. And then I started doing video essays and stuff like that. And that kind of brought me to where I am now. And then I started... No, my latest era would be like more experimental stuff. You know, the long form 2-hour content. I didn't do that before, and now I do. It's great. Yeah. How did you get into The Last Airbender? So, I didn't have cable when I was a kid, so I couldn't watch it when it was first airing. But it was on like another channel, random episodes every once a week at like 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And I was a swimmer for most of my life. Competitive swimmer. So I was training 6 mornings a week, including Saturday, and so if we finished early by chance, and I got home just in time, then I would be able to catch potentially an episode of Avatar, and that was the highlight of my week if I managed to do it. And that is where I first fell in love with Avatar. I actually, because we just didn't have cable, and I didn't have access to it, and I had no way of getting it, I didn't get to watch the season finale of season 3 until I was actually in high school, but I loved it the whole time. What is the most immersive storytelling medium? There is no right answer here. You could say games if you want to, because there's player agency involved, but you can say books, because obviously books, you know, whatever. If you could live in any fictional world or universe, what would it be? And go into detail. Who would you be? What would you do? So, the culture from the Ian Banks' culture series is so expansive that you could go to like a world where there's technology that allows you to pretend to be a wizard who has like fire magic, and you get to act out stories and battles and stuff. It'd be amazing. I would go into freaking... I would just stay in like a cyberspace matrix thing and just live out like a magical thing where I get to be an awesome wizard who goes on cool adventures and stuff like that, but I can't die. You know, or like, you know, you can... That was what I do. That is, of course, what I do. How close is your book to completion? I have just sent out my novel to about 20 agents. I've already gotten 1 rejection. It's part of it. You can get rejected for a ton of things. Have to remind myself of that. But that is the journey that I am on. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start a YouTube channel? Good audio matters a lot more than good visuals. Just get something like a Blue Yeti, something like that. They're not too horrendously expensive. Was what I did my videos on for the first couple of years. What's a story you've always wanted to like but just couldn't? Why? The Dragon Prince kind of fits in here. I do like it, but it's always just been a little bit too immature, just not quite as deep, a little bit unsubtle, not as expansive as I feel like it always promised to be and could have been. We're now at like season 4 and it only just feels like the story is even beginning, and that's kind of disappointing. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the Legend of Genji fanfic series? All power to them. I think it's great what they're doing. Fanfic's not really my thing, but I understand it is for a lot of people. Cool them. Are you worried that ChatGPT will replace writers? It's not going to replace like creative writing, at least not yet. What it will do is take away a lot of jobs of like little writing things, you know, for advertisements or for the side of water bottles, you know, which writers may have once done. And yeah, that's kind of scary in a sense, because that's changing the economy in a pretty fundamental way pretty quickly, and that's going to make things a lot harder for a lot of people in the industry. But I tend to believe that there will be new avenues that open up. Or at least I hope that's the case. I don't know. Neil Clark, who runs Clark's World, one of the biggest sci-fi magazines in the entire world, put out a thing saying that, yeah, tons of AI-generated short stories are being sent to him, and they're really obvious, and he hates it, but also that some might be slipping through. And that is a pretty dire place to be in. I don't know how we're going to deal with that, but I hope we do. In your opinion, what is the most important element of a story? In my opinion, it is the characters. Yeah, you can absolutely say the characters, because they are what anchor us in the story a lot of the time. There's a good argument to say themes, because, you know, that's what makes a story, you know, kind of hit and last and out, you know, and stand the test of time. It's the ideas that it engages with. That's often what sticks with me. But probably one of those two. What is your name, Tim? What is your quest to find the Holy Grail? What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Ah! When will the winds of winter come out? Tomorrow. Surely. Or the tomorrow after that. Or the tomorrow after that. Or the tomorrow after that. Ad infinitum, I presume. Favorite Avatar ship? I Honestly, I don't really tend to ship anyone. I'm not really a shipper. I've just never been someone who's cared that much about the romantic relationships in a fictional story. I don't know why. They've just never really hit. I think the only one that's ever really stuck with me is Jim and Pam from The Office, and that's like so basic. I don't even know why. Do you think your accent is superior to the American accent? Yes, I think the New Zealand accent is the best accent in existence. I think it is the sexiest, wisest, most intelligent sounding accent in the world. I don't think there's any... I think everyone would agree. I don't think anyone would comment down below, Tim, you are wrong about the accent. Are your books available on Amazon or Audible, or we'll have to go somewhere else? They are available on Amazon and Audible, though to be honest I've thought about removing them from Audible. I need to get around to that, maybe, just because there's a bunch of controversy with how they pay authors going on at the moment. Were you aware your evil twin isn't dead? If you were aware, what is he up to? What? My evil twin's not dead? Where is he? He must be planning something. It's been years since I've heard from him. Can I be the first question? Well, number 248, I guess not. But you can be the last question. Not even kidding, coincidentally, you are the last question. There we go. I hope I got all of them. There were a couple I missed for a few other reasons, but it's been a hell of a ride. I love this job. I love all of you. Thank you for being so supportive and letting me do this. For me, as I'm filming this right now, like my Japanese war crimes video just came out, and it's doing well at the moment. I hope it continues that way. I have some on writing videos. I've got my book going out to agents. When this video drops, I'm sure that some of these things would have changed. I am very fortunate to be able to have this job. But, yeah, I hope I can keep doing it and make things that you guys enjoy and that you like, you know. Anyways, stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.